Thank you very much. Is my microphone on? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. So as you've heard, we're here this evening to talk about the genomics revolution, which sounds great in a fuzzy, nebulous kind of way. But what are we really talking about? What does the genomics revolution actually look like? Well, I think most of us tend to imagine all kinds of sleek, shiny, high-tech devices that, with nothing more than a speck of blood, will tell us what our health future holds. And ideally, they'll also tell us what kinds of personalized pills we should be taking if we were to get sick. But in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to get sick in the first place. What if we could use genomic information as a way to motivate people to engage in behavior changes that would reduce their risk for common conditions that we face as humans? Cancer, heart disease, diabetes, mental illness. In fact, this is one of the golden grails of genomic medicine. It's one of the key pieces of the genomics revolution. So let's think about this a bit more seriously. Okay, so let's say you had a genetic test that told you that you had increased risk for heart disease. You'd use that information to eat more healthily and get more exercise, right? Okay, well, maybe, but perhaps not so fast. Let's see if I can shed some light on it from a different angle. So how many of us, by show of hands, know that nutrition is really important in reducing our risks for all kinds of different kinds of health conditions? How many of us, though, are always really good about choosing veggies and water over fries and beer? Oh, there's a couple of you, well done. But you get the idea. So by our own admission, information alone is not enough to get us to consistently change our health behaviors, okay? And, sorry, I've lost my train of thought for a second. So yes, information alone isn't enough to get us to change our health behaviors. But you might say to me, if I had a genetic test result that told me I had this increased risk for heart disease, that would be different. I would eat right then, right? And that's what scientists thought too. We thought that genetic information would be different. So there were some studies. And then there were some more studies, and yet more studies. And in the end, there was a study of all the studies, and we call that a meta-analysis. And unfortunately, what all of these studies together showed was that genetic information is not enough to get people to change their health behavior to reduce their risk. So this was, to put it mildly, pretty disappointing, because this is one of the key pieces of the genomics revolution, after all. But there is some good news. I and my team have been having some success with using genetic information to help people make behavior changes to reduce their risk. Woo! Haven't done any slides, have I? Okay, information is not enough. We've also just seen that genetic information is not enough. So I and my group have been having some success, and what we found is that to help people make behavior changes, we require two things. The first thing that we need is a coherent story for people that links their understanding for cause of illness together with the risk reduction strategies we're suggesting. And the second thing we need is to address people's emotions. That's critical. So I'm going to share a story with you that will illustrate how this can work, and it's about somebody we'll call Jane. Jane is a composite of a variety of people. So Jane was 50. She had a job that she loved and that she was really good at. She also had bipolar disorder, and everybody at work knew about this and was really supportive, but her mental health wasn't good. She had to keep taking lots of time off for depression. I met Jane because she came to see me for genetic counselling. She wanted to talk about the chances for her daughter to develop bipolar 2. She felt it was going to happen at any day now. So when I meet with people as a genetic counsellor, one of my first questions is always to tell me what they understand about the cause of the illness that they have. Jane's explanation was simply genetics. As it turned out, she'd actually experienced a whole bunch of really stressful life events in the immediate run-up to her diagnosis, but she didn't think about those as having anything to do with it. So I talked with Jane about the research evidence showing that bipolar is caused by combined effects of genes and our experiences acting together. I had to work really hard to get Jane to hear this, and when it finally sank in, she was horrified. She explained that she would not have been okay with anybody knowing that she had bipolar disorder had she known it was anything other than 100% genetic, for fear that people would blame her. So I spent quite some time counselling her around this fear and around this shame. And I also worked to help her see that those life events that she'd experienced weren't things that she could justifiably be blamed for. So aside from taking medication, Jane really wasn't doing very much to take care of her mental health. So we talked about the research evidence that sleep, nutrition, exercise, good social support can all be really helpful, and how if she were to use some of these strategies together with her medication, perhaps she could be doing better with her mental health. We also talked about how these same strategies could be helpful in protecting her daughter's mental health, and how it was far from a foregone conclusion that she would also get sick. At one point, through tears, Jane told me, if we'd known it was anything other than just genetic, we would have had more children. We went into some pretty heavy emotional stuff together. 1 month after our appointment, though, Jane's mental health was much better than it had been in years. She was doing her best to eat more healthily. She was going for a walk every day. She was working to get, she'd actually lost 10 pounds. She was working to get better quality sleep, and she and her daughter had signed up for mindfulness meditation classes together. So Jane was able to use the information that I gave her in order to make behaviour changes to reduce not just her risk, but that of her daughter as well. To do this, she needed two things. She needed a coherent story linking the explanation for a cause of illness with the treatment and risk reduction strategies we were suggesting. Initially, she'd thought her condition was entirely genetic, biological in origin. So the only treatment strategy that made sense to her was biological, medication. So in order to accept that there were things that she could do to take care of her mental health, the genetic information had to be contextualized. She had to understand that it wasn't entirely genetically determined. So importantly, all of the other common conditions that we face as humans, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, these all arise as a result of combined effects of genes and environment acting together. So we could use the same approach. The other thing that I think the story shows us quite nicely is that people's explanations for cause of illness have deep and powerful emotional connections. In order to act on the idea that there were things that she could do to protect her mental health, Jane had to accept a new model for her illness explanation, right? And that meant that she had to confront the regret of not having had more children, and she had to confront her vulnerability towards others' judgment. So the counselling piece was absolutely key. You have to address those emotions. So the counselling component of the genetic counselling is really what matters here. So I think what we've been doing in medicine for a long time is working under the assumption that genetic information on its own is enough, and it doesn't matter how we deliver it. As long as people understand, that's fine. What research shows, what we now know, is that genetic information alone is not enough. And what my group's research is showing is that in order to help people, we need to give them these things. We need to give them a coherent story linking their explanation for cause of illness with the treatment or risk reduction strategies we're suggesting. And we also need to address the emotions that can act as barriers to behaviour change. So I would argue that if we want to be able to help people to use genomic information to engage in behaviour change, to reduce their risk for common conditions, we need to exploit the skills of genetic counsellors because they truly hold the key to the genomics revolution. Thank you very much.